You can read this essay at endtheduopoly.org. Never mind the change twaddle both parties are peddling this election season. Business as usual will reign in Washington and most state capitals until voters break the Republican-Democrat or Republicrat power duopoly. The number of anxious and discontent Americans is at an all-time high. An August 2008 LA Times Bloomberg poll reported that 76% of all adult Americans think things in the U.S. are, quote, seriously off on the wrong track. Yet nearly all voters will cast ballots this November for representatives of the same Republican parties who for decades been engineering the wayward train. No offense intended, but this reminds me of a definition of insanity attributed variously to Ben Franklin or Albert Einstein, doing the same thing over and over while expecting a different result. I'll vote again for a third-party candidate for president, and I'll vote for other third-party candidates who are demonstrably and historically committed to genuine reform. Do I think my choices might win? Of course not, especially since Republicans refuse to debate real issues in front of voters with third-party candidates. That would be counter to their mutual and foremost goals, staying in power. But relentlessly voting for smart, credible third-party candidates is the only way eventually to break the Republican duopoly. The Republicans' record proves a deficit in the capacity for effecting real change. Americans are repeatedly suckered into voting for Republicans, promising reform and change, and repeatedly get mostly more of the same, just rebranded and repositioned. Now that's putting lipstick on a pig. More often than not, legislation is crafted and Congress's and the administration's agenda set not to serve or protect or uplift Americans, but to injure politically the other side or repay party benefactors. This joint enterprise in depravity, now called governing, leaves scant time for tending to ordinary constituents' interests, though that's all we're paying these public servants to do. At the top of Congress's agenda until the Wall Street bailout, the so-called energy bill is only the most recent example. Democrats' motive for the now meltdown-deferred legislation was to inoculate its candidates against voters' wrath about gasoline prices. Democrats knew up front the bill wouldn't become law, whether stopped by Republican filibuster or presidential veto, but that was irrelevant since the purpose of the bill was not to help Americans, but to boost Democrats' elections prospects. Well, we tried to expand offshore drilling and reduce gas prices for y'all, but those evil Republicans stopped us. And in the unlikely event Republicans had surprised Democrats and enacted the bill, Democrats spin, through our bipartisan spirit of compromise, we've worked in a bipartisan manner to increase domestic energy production by expanding bipartisan offshore drilling. Mission accomplished in either case. Republicans, perceiving the most political benefit to Democrats if the legislation is passed, likely will, when it's resurrected, stop the bill. The role ordinary Americans' fortunes play in this inside the Capitol charade? None, except we're paying for it. This sort of maddening, wasteful, insular farce is standard operating procedure in the Republicracy. With the turmoil on Wall Street, Americans' worry has grown, which evidently has liberated Obama's and McCain's latent outrage over Wall Street's destructive graft and greed, producing indignant pledges to make things right. Little publicized is that former investment bank Goldman Sachs' employees and connections are the top underwriters, $692,000 and counting, of Obama's campaign, while McCain's top 5 contributor groups are the modest folk associated with Merrill Lynch, $298,000, Citigroup, $269,000, Morgan Stanley, $233,000, Goldman Sachs, $208,000, covering all the bases, and J.P. Morgan Chase, $180,000. Though undoubtedly adorned with a laughable title like Making Wall Street Serve Ordinary Americans Act, the obligatory reform legislation enacted next year will have been written by lobbyists for the Republicrats' chief sponsors, Wall Street banks. Why else would Wall Street be contributing millions to Obama and McCain if not to assure continued management of its own destiny. Is voting third party wasting a ballot? No, voting against the candidate you fear most, or for the candidate who's least bad, as many Americans do, instead of for one advocating the changes you'd like to see in America, is truly wasteful with respect to improving the country. And isn't improving the country what elections are for? Further, third-party candidates needn't win elections to influence the country's direction. As professional panderers madly devoted to retaining power, the Republicrats naturally would co-opt proposals of even moderately popular, if not victorious, third-party candidates. The national debt became a prominent issue in the 1990s, and the federal government briefly posted a budget surplus only because of Ross Perot's fiscally focused 1992 presidential campaign, though Perot got just 18.8% of the vote. Once Perot faded from prominence, Republicrats resumed ignoring the national debt and annual federal deficits. The debt has roughly doubled since 1999, and their negligence partly underlies the ongoing financial crisis. Many Democrats, frustrated by their electoral impotence, blame voters like me for the Bush-Cheney tenure. This logic strikes me as akin to holding responsible for a burglary the homeowner who leaves the door unlocked. No, the burglar's the culpable party, and to state the tautological, only those who voted for Bush, perhaps most notably a handful of corrupt Florida election officials and 5 Supreme Court justices, are responsible for his election. Moreover, telling me I need to abandon what I consider my foremost civic responsibility, voting for candidates who in my judgment will best advance the citizenry's interests, and instead vote strategically to prevent a particular candidate from winning, is condescending and anti-democratic. I am patient. No single election can or will bring meaningful change to America. I don't expect the Republicrats' strong stranglehold on democracy to be much loosened during my lifetime. But I also know the duopoly can never be broken, barring an American equivalent of storming the Bastille, unless Americans vote for third-party candidates. And I believe the duopoly must be broken for the sake of our democracy. All great reforms, ending slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, at first face seemingly insurmountable resistance from existing power structures. A trickle of change agents, crucially with democratic principle on their side, gradually, over decades, grew in number and influence until their movement became an irresistible torrent. My sights are not set on the next 4 or 8 or even 12 years, but on the next generation and the next century. As you prepare to vote for local, state, and national candidates this fall, my humble proposal is this. Form in your mind a desired vision of your community and your country when your kids or grandkids are middle-aged. Write down a half-dozen ideals that characterize your vision. Then consider honestly not the Republicrats' rhetoric, but their record of instituting genuine change and making progress toward your ideals. If you believe Republicrats can and will affect the change you want, whether in the short or long term, then please vote for them. Your and my electoral philosophies would be in accord. But if you're inclined to conclude, as I have, that meaningful change has not and in fact cannot come from within the Republicrat power duopoly, but can only come from outside, then consider the many excellent third-party candidates on November's ballot. Thanks for listening.